Welcome to the EatingCast. I am Chris.
And I'm Vincent, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Annie Tan. She is a special education teacher, activist, writer, and storyteller based in Chinatown, New York City. Annie fights for students, public education, teachers' unions, tenants' rights, and Asian American issues, organizing a better world. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Huffington Post, the New Republic, PBS documentary series Asian Americans, and twice on the Moth Radio Hour. Annie is currently working on a book about her family and Asian American history. You can follow Annie's work at annietan.com and at annietangent. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome, Annie. So just want to take a minute and just thank you for coming on. It's really an honor to really have someone like, in a sense of your stature and kind of like, in their community and just kind of spreading like just awareness for like all sorts of things, whether it's just like, the teachers union, kind of going back to school currently with like COVID and everything like that, as well as just the work you do, right? And just kind of like raising awareness and kind of like bringing us as a community together. So like pretty much all people of color, as well as just like, our subgroup of like just Asian Americans in a sense.
That makes me feel like I'm bigger than I am. And I'm like, what? It's, we were just talking about how like, wow, like, some people, like, I'm represented by District Assemblywoman Yulene Nyo, and all of a sudden she got so big, talking in the New York State Assembly and all of that, and it's just really bizarre, like how much like so many individuals are making a difference right now, and that everyone's doing their part. So I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm really excited to talk to you both.
Definitely. Again, thank you again for coming on. So with that said, Annie, can you just give us like a quick rundown, right? Like I know like right now, technically it's still in the whole like the summer break portion of for schools, as you are a teacher and everything like that. So how are you kind of handling like, just summer break in a sense where we're in a current pandemic, as well as kind of like handling the whole transition of like kind of like schools trying to, like in the process of like trying to reopen, as well as just the constant fight that's being had, trying to oppose that opening of schools.
It is a nightmare. It is an absolute nightmare. I think all of the teachers, my teachers union president, like we've all said that this is the worst summer ever. It's insane that we have to go and fight for our lives right now. Like the week I'm speaking to you right now, I like had an interview out in the New Republic again around how I am fighting as my job to keep schools from reopening buildings. And then I was also like quoted in New York Mag having to say out loud, like, what is the biggest issue of school reopening? And my biggest issue is, well, people will die if we reopen schools. But the other thing is that I don't want my kids coming into school thinking that their presence killed someone in school because they may have spread the virus to their parents or their grandparents, because we all know that this virus doesn't affect children the same way as it does adults. And I don't want to put my students in that situation. So the fact that I have to even like talk to people, I have to go organize with teachers, I have to write about this. The fact that we're just all fighting for our lives right now seems like something out of a dystopian novel, where teachers just are so, like, like March, like there were all these people saying, oh, teachers are saints, thank you for everything you do. And then April or May hit and they're like, no, you teachers aren't doing enough. Why can't you do live instruction? Why can't you do this? And now going back to here, like they're literally asking me to be a martyr right now for the economy, right? To go in and raise our kids because we don't have like a social safety net for childcare and for food and for shelter for our temporarily sheltered and homeless students. It just feels like everything that our society is doing wrong has been placed on teachers. So it's been very terrible. So thank you for asking that, Chris.
Sounds like Asian parenting to me, huh?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're doing great. Nope, just kidding. Not enough.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my goodness.
like,
Actually,
in a nutshell.
I have so I've been helping my parents translate actually because my parents don't speak English. And so I've been helping them translate a doctor's appointments, and my dad was asking me to do all this stuff for him. And in Cantonese, like I'm just like, Papa, they you could say thank you, Dad, right? Because I've been translating for decades for him. And then he's like, you're my daughter. Like, this is just what you do, right? And I was like, what? Like, no, like all I'm asking is for a thank you. And in that scenario, he's not asking me to risk my life, just to be clear. And then a few days later, I helped him do something else, and he was like, thank you.
Oh my gosh.
That is all I asked.
Oh
They
my
love to rub
God.
it in our faces so much.
That's funny though, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like, in a sense, being like, first generation Asian Americans born here, right? It's like, that's something that we have to do, or even like, probably not even just us, but like, of like all POCs, right? It's like just the first generation that's born here, they have to take on that, not, I won't say like a burden, but like that need, right? To really help their families like communicate with the world around them.
Yep.
Right. Definitely something that when you look back at it, it's like, I see it as like an honor just because like, I'm able to help, our parents along the lines of like, they came here to give us a better life. And it's just like a small token back to them that, we can help them feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more at home, right? Because they left their homes for whatever reason it may be, whether, it's just turmoil within the country or just kind of trying to find a better living for the family, as well as just trying to achieve more for the kids that they have, just because they don't like the government or anything that's kind of like happening in their country.
Right. And I'm completely happy to help. It's not like clearly any of us have like been like, no, I'm the ungrateful, like I can't believe I have to do this all day. I'm sure we have all felt it, like just that I'll say responsibility, because it is a responsibility. But I also like realize like they have a whole life. It's funny, I think for a while, like I remembered in elementary school learning about the boat people, right? Like immigrants who came across on boats. And then I asked my parents one day, I was like, hey, like, what boat did you come on? When did you come across a boat? And then my parents just looked at me like I was an idiot and were like, we flew here. Like, what are you talking about? And there were just like all these preconceived notions that I had as a kid, like growing up in elementary school, even though I grew up here in Chinatown. And it was like 96% Chinese kids. Like I had like almost all white teachers, and they didn't have the nuance of like what new immigration patterns look like. And they taught about China like it was like a whole separate country. They were teaching about China like we teach about dead white guys. Like it was completely removed from us. So in like third grade, she's like, oh, like my third grade teacher's like, here's Beijing, here's Tiananmen Square, here's some of the cultural things about China, without telling us that we were Chinese. Like it was just so bizarre. Partly why I'm a teacher today. So, but just to go back to what you were saying about parents, it's like, I think so many of us like forget that they had whole lives before they came to America. And that there's like a richness there that we almost forget because America taught us to love white bodies in the media and everything else.
That's definitely something that's like really interesting to kind of like think about, that like, our families or our parents, right? And, like just like all of our, older relatives, right? Our aunts and uncles that are here now, they left a life that they had, whatever it may be, right, in China, and they're here now. Mm-hmm. It's the craziest thought, because within, I want to say like the last maybe 4 or 5 years, my dad has been reconnecting with a lot of his like older like elementary school friends, right, through WeChat.
Yes.
Right? And I'm like, who are you talking to at like freaking like 2 a.m?
Yes.
Like, oh, this is my my classmate from Guangdong, China, dude. I'm like, how
did they connect?
What? That's a good question. I don't know how they connected. That's one thing that I cannot figure out.
No,
Like,
it's funny. So like my dad, he had the same exact story like 2, 3 years ago. He's like, this is my friend who I haven't seen in 28 years. He's now in San Francisco, but we grew up together in China. And
mhm,
no, I think it's just like WeChat friends like know each other. It's kind of like how we find Facebook friends, right? It's the same network. It's like, oh, this friend kept in touch with this friend, and then like 6 generations or networks later, it's like, oh, it's you. Look at you. So, and
mhm.
then like they want to, Trump wants to shut down WeChat. So how the hell
I was about
are
to say
our?
that.
Oh no, it's gonna be
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah, they wanted
So
to do that, and then like, so we have a friend named Shifa, and he's in Chinatown. He's like an advocate down there, and he was basically saying like, why are you trying to take down WeChat? Because we have these, people who use it for communication. They share resources. They share information about like how to get around and stuff like that. And if you take that down, then that's a whole new other barrier that's gonna be back up.
And
definitely.
it's such a huge thing for intergenerational too, like kids like us. Like I love using the talk feature, like the walkie talkie kind of feature, to just send voice messages to my mom, because my mom's always like, she's always asking me if I want groceries, like, and she takes a picture of what it is. But what's it called? Yeah, without that, like, it's going to be much tougher to communicate with my parents from a distance over WeChat or anything. And a lot of us kids don't know how to type in Chinese or anything like that. So that voice message feature has been really important in my own family and in Chinatown in general. So I also read somewhere that it's going to affect like the 3 million users that are mostly Chinese here in America, which is not good for us. No.
Definitely not.
I know you mentioned Annie on a talking on an interview with Nestor Gomez, and you were talking about how a lot of immigrants who come to America, they hold on to certain traditions compared to people in the mainland homeland, where they are changing traditions like culturally. What do you think? Why do you think we keep holding on to certain things here in America? Like, I know you mentioned that we feel like we've lost something, right? We're just trying to grasp it.
Hmm. I think I think everyone's trying to just hold on to what makes sense and belonging so much. Like I think for so long, like in college, for instance, like I went to Columbia, which is bougie Ivy League. They were also super proud of me because Chinese Asian parents want you to go to an Ivy League. Um, but I remember like meeting my classmates, and they'd come from boarding schools, and like, half my class didn't qualify for financial aid. So like their families made like 125,000 and above, like all of them, which was just like, whoa, like just class differences. So like I really held on to like my poor working class Chinese Asian American kid from Chinatown identity all through my time there, because I just didn't feel like I belonged at Columbia, even though I clearly deserved a spot there and I clearly got in. But I like, and to this day I still hold on to that. Like I got cred from being here. Um and it's almost like a defense mechanism for anyone. I'm sure you two have your own defense mechanisms of like holding on to something of who you are in order to make sense of a world that doesn't want you. I mean, that's what we're doing with the coronavirus right now. We're like, no, we're Chinese. Like, we are here. Like, we didn't cause this. In fact, it's the Italian spread of the coronavirus that caused this. But I also am not going to blame Italian people for the spread of coronavirus. That's not me either. Um, but I think everyone has a defense mechanism, but we also like internalize in our heads like the ways things work. So like I grew up not being able to buy like markers for class or something, or uh, having to save my own money for just a special meal out in college or whatever it is. So I grew up very much under a scarcity mindset, which very much served me as a kid, uh, low income parents from Chinatown. And it takes decades to unlearn some of that stuff. If you like grew up under like abusive parents, it might take you decades to unlearn all that, all those issues. So I think it's just, our brains get wired at a young age based on how we grew up. And until you meet other people who grew up differently, or like you talk with people actually, like you can't unwire that. It was funny. It was in that interview with Nestor that I said, like, I told my brothers I was, maybe it wasn't that interview, maybe it was another one. But, I was complaining to my brothers, you're boys. I'm the girl in the family. Like, you don't get it. Dad doesn't trust me. Dad calls me every day. Dad's always yelling at me. And then my brothers were just straight up like, no, Annie, like, he calls us every day too. Like, he is as overprotective to us as he is to you. This is not just a you thing. This is a dad thing. And then I was like, oh, Dad's not a patriarchal person. It's just that he really cares about his kids, and he shows it in a way that I don't like. And so then I could actually be like a little bit more forgiving toward him, because I just thought he was sexist for a long time.
Oh my goodness.
That's so funny. But I totally get that. I totally get that feeling, right? Like your dad like just calls you like nonstop. Is like, what are you doing? Did you eat? And just kind of like
They say, always the first thing is, have you eaten yet? Always.
So I have a very similar kind of like background in a sense, right? Just because like my dad would do the same thing to me, except he won't ask if I ate yet. He's like, he'd be like, what do you want to eat?
Oh.
Yeah, because like he hit up the restaurant, and everything like that, and yeah, we talked about this earlier, like before the podcast, but yeah, like my family owns a restaurant and everything like that. It's holding through, the pandemic and everything like that. We're doing our best, but it is what it is. You can't really do anything about it. It's happening around the world.
I know.
So just gotta bite
Dang,
the bullet.
that's like an extra barrier. There's like, for Asians, right? It's I love you, have you eaten yet, and then now a new one. What do you want to eat? So you gotta get past that one.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, right? Like, what do you want to eat? That's his way of saying, like, I care, and I just want to make sure you're fed.
Yeah.
Hell
and
yeah.
that's also one of the reasons why, like, my grandfather came to the States and like opened up a restaurant over here in Chicago, right? Like, he wanted to open up a noodle restaurant. So when he first immigrated here, it was like he was talking to like my aunties in like San Francisco, and he was actually in New York for a little bit with a business partner trying to do something, but then he got swindled, unfortunately. It happens. It happens.
It happens. Yeah. No, and just looking at like the history of Asian Americans who had to either open restaurants or do laundry, like this is going to disproportionately hit the Asian American community in another way.
Definitely.
Where all these restaurants are closed. I've seen so many restaurants here in Chinatown close. And I'm really worried that like, a lot of our elders like didn't and don't want to do delivery services or have a website because they just, and this is not in a deficit model. This is just, they serve low cost meals because they can serve them at high volume here in Chinatown and get people in and out very quickly. And that's been their business model for 50, 60 years. So to adjust to a pandemic, like, how are we going to belittle them for not having a website,
Yeah.
Not only that, but as Asians, like we have so much pride that like when we receive help, most times they say, no, it's okay. Like we can handle ourselves, or they're so humbling to the point where it's like detrimental as well. Like I know what, when growing up, I was always taught when you're given a compliment, reject it. Right. Even when you go to New Year's, oh, gong hei fa choi, right? You, even though you're asking for a red packet and they give it to you, you have to still say no, it's okay. So it's like a game. It's weird.
It is a game. Like, have you ever? Okay, so this is how I found out my dad like thinks highly of me. It's when he talks to his other friends on WeChat about me. Like, oh, Ingni, like, like she went to such a good college, she got a financial aid, all of that. And then when it comes back to me, it's always backhanded compliments. Like, oh, like, you look a little skinnier today. Like, Yeah, it doesn't look like you're still big boned, but you look skinnier since the last time. So it's always backhanded compliments like that to me. But when it comes to other people, they're actually bragging about me. And that's the only time I know that I've done okay.
That's crazy to think about though, because like I also kind of like experienced that, but in a different way. I would get a lot of like negative comments growing up, like always comparing me to like my cousins. Why aren't you as good as your cousins over here? Look at your cousins doing this, doing that, right? And the reason for that, right, for me at least, it was because I grew up in a broken family, meaning like my dad and my mom, like they divorced when I was very young and everything like that, and then they started their own families right after.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like kind of that only child that's like kind of like in the middle between two different families. Is like, what do I do here and there, right?
Right.
So
Right.
as that kid, I would cause a lot of trouble, and because like I was always seeking attention. I was like, I just didn't know what to do with my life, right? Because like in a sense, I would see my friends, right, and my other cousins, right, their families are all together, right? Their mom and dad are always home and everything like that. And I was like, why am I the only one that's going around like from my mom's house to my dad's house? And then like it ended up being like, just kind of me being taken care of by like my extended family in a sense as a kid. Like don't get me wrong, I love my family. I love my extended family. I love all my cousins, all my aunties, all my uncles, right? Because they taught me right. They taught me wrong. Like they taught me like what's right and what's wrong and everything like that. And they showed me how to grow up in like a more proper way. And I love them for that. But it's just like as a kid growing up, you're confused.
Yeah.
You just don't know what to do. And because
Right.
of that, I always seeked like just the center of attention in a sense, right? I always wanted the center of attention. And how do I do that? This is gonna sound really horrible because you're a teacher and everything, Annie. But I purposefully got bad grades just so that I got attention from my mom and dad.
Mm-hmm. No,
How
and
messed up is that?
that's a real thing. No, I had so many smart students over the years, like that were completely capable. And I knew they could do the work and I knew they could read and I knew they could do things. But there was something social emotionally that they didn't have, and I would try, like, luckily I've been a special education teacher for 8 or 9 years. I'm going into my 9th year this year, actually.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Thank you. And I've seen so many students who like do that like learned helplessness thing where like either they don't feel like they'll ever get the help they need, so they like do things that don't help them succeed in school. But then also, like, is it my issue as a special education teacher? Like, is it right for me to push an essay on a kid who doesn't know how to read yet? Like, how can I help get that kid toward feeling like they're successful? Because so many kids that get to me, they feel stupid. They feel like no one understood them in the system, and no wonder they're stupid. Like there's something wrong with them. So they think, because there's something wrong with me, all I'm gonna do is like lash out or something. When there was just such a deep need, and not that I'm a savior or anything. They just needed someone to see them and hear them, because they were fine the whole time, and just to have models of what could possibly be. I'm sure you growing up, Chris, like you didn't see anyone else like with divorced parents, right? And dealing with that. And had you had people in your life, kids in your life who also came from divorced parents, wouldn't it have been so powerful for you to have someone to talk to about that, right? And the same thing with like my students. It's like, oh, like if they had someone to talk to about the fact that their mom has cancer, or that like their uncle's in prison, like stuff that I certainly don't have experience with in that way, that like, once I got that from them, like I would just pre-pandemic times like hold them and like let them cry on my shoulder for like however long they needed, because they just been holding this in for so long. So sometimes just people need to be heard. I mean, I'm so happy I grew up in Chinatown, because I grew up with all kinds of Chinese kids, like the ABCs, the American-born Chinese kids like me. But then there were the FOBs, fresh off the boat kids. Even though that's not politically correct right now. That's what, we called them and they called themselves. They were like the athletic kids, the North Face kids who had a little bit more money. But like, the ones who were watching J-pop and K-pop, like all these different kinds of Chinese kids that made me feel like, no, like there's a wide berth of who gets to be Chinese American. So when I got to college and I met all these Chinese kids who grew up with white people and in the suburbs, they were just starting to figure out what it meant to be Chinese American. And I had all this wide like variety of Chinese American people around me that I didn't have to seek out my identity because I knew who I was already. Because like unlike them, like I got to see other people. They only got to see, unfortunately, white kids in media.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to add to that because growing up, I was always in a bubble, right? I always thought that, I guess you could say I was living the model minority myth to like its peak, and I didn't know. And it wasn't until, I don't know, high school where I learned that, oh, in Asian families, fathers could have gambling addictions, mothers could have gambling addictions. They have abusive, siblings and abusive parents, and just like toxic households. And also, up until I met Chris, I never really dabbled in the idea that, oh shit, Asian families can have divorced parents, right? And I think that's what hurts. And we always talk about this is, with the model minority, we're always placed on the pedestal. We're always seen as, oh, they're so perfect. Like what could possibly go wrong? But deep down, we're all broken, and not all broken, but we all have these issues and struggles that we're trying to just get past. And until we meet like-minded people or people with similar situations, we won't know, like you were saying.
Or different people. But then also like as a teacher, like, I'll as a Chinese American and Asian American teacher, I just have all these people come up to me all the time. It's like, you must have been such a good kid in school, right? I mean, like a lot of teachers are the ones who did good in school. So let's be real about that. But then like I started teaching in Sunset Park in Brooklyn. I teach Latinx and Chinese kids. Because I speak a little Spanish, and I taught in Little Village in Chicago for a few years before moving back to New York, where it was mostly Latinx, Mexican kids. And I would just hear these comments from like staff members and like just people in my community, like, oh, like the Chinese kids are good at math. There was like one year where we had the awards assembly at the end of the 5th grade, right, where the kids are about to graduate, and all of the kids who got the math awards were Chinese kids. And we were just like, oh no, like, is this like racist? Like, are we the ones as staff, like pushing Chinese kids to be the best in this? Like, do we have like an implicit bias, like toward positive stereotypes around Asian kids? And it's us too. Like the adults are pushing this on the kids all the time and being like, oh, the Asian kids are the ones like with really tough parents who go to tutoring, who like really care too much about like a B on one test. Whereas like we don't extend the same courtesy to Black and brown people.
Growing up, were your parents strict on you?
No, they were working all the time. They didn't make us do chores or anything. They were just like, as long as you get good grades, like you don't have to do any chores in the house. So no, they were working. Like my mom was working 2 jobs. My dad worked 6 days a week as a construction worker. So like there was no time to be strict on us. They were just home and tired. So
yeah, I feel like that's a really big commonality across like a lot of Asian Americans, right? Like their parents work ridiculous hours and they're just kind of like, when they get home, they just want to relax. And like really the last thing they want to do is to, trouble themselves with just trying to pester you to do better. But at the same time,
yeah, go on.
At the same time, they want you to, do good, obviously. Like, so when they do see those report cards, they're like, why did you get a B? It's like, you can do so much better than this. And then it's like, that's pretty good. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's just a
That
crazy.
hurt me
Oh,
in college, dude. Like when I got my first C or D, I like cried. I literally was sitting at the Lake Michigan at Loyola campus, and I was like, what? I was like, what is wrong with me? Why am I so stupid? Right? And I just had like the condescending, mom and dad like yelling at me. But then I eventually had to learn like, okay, this is normal. Uh, you know, it was hard. It was hard.
right. And then it was the other I remember my first C in college too. I was just like, oh no, calculus 2, like this is terrible. Anyway, but I was gonna say that because my parents were working so hard though, it was they didn't really have to push us so much because we knew like we were the retirement plan. Like we knew as young kids we were the retirement plan. Not because they pushed it on us, but because they didn't know English and they weren't going to learn English working 6 days a week as like at their jobs. So like I knew like from real early on, even if I couldn't say it, like that I was always going to have to translate, going back to that responsibility thing. So like it was almost a do well in school or like you will not be able to support your family in the future. Like it's that deep and that scary. And I like talking about the patterns from earlier, like I tend to overproduce, hence me doing everything you introduced me in the introduction. And I'm trying to slow down right now because that's not healthy.
It is not.
It's not. No. Like I was talking to my partner about this and he's just like, yeah, like you are doing too much. Like, him and my roommate through this whole pandemic have been like, slow down, give yourself time. Like, you don't have to keep doing this. It is not a crisis. Your family's healthy. They are surviving without you. You get your time now, Annie. Like, it should be that simple, but like when you grow up in that hustle mindset, it's like, it's so hard to get out of that.
Yeah, and I just think going back to what we were talking about earlier, how, what are some things that we take with us in terms of cultural traditions or even I want to say work ethic. And, the internal mind, for me at least, is saying like, oh, I am able to put more on my plate because my parents did, my grandparents did. So what do I have to complain about, right? And so, like you said, that's actually very detrimental and it hurts because when I have so many things I want to do, right? Finish my master's program, do podcasts, open up a business, right? Stuff like that. And then if I do achieve those things, it's okay, what's next? It's
Mm-hmm.
always what's next. We're never satisfied. And it always comes back to the not enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's unhealthy. Yeah, for
Right.
sure.
Right. And I only unlearned that through being a special ed teacher. I'm not a special ed student, sorry. Being a special education teacher and being like, oh, my students have been tossed aside by the education system because they're not able to produce in the same way that I was as a kid. And like they're tossed aside as if they don't matter. And just working with them and knowing that their humanity matters, right? Besides any level of productivity they are or are not able to do, made me realize, wait, like this whole productivity thing it just doesn't work. It works in a capitalist society where everyone's trying to get as much as they want out of us workers, including me as a teacher this fall, without actually thinking about our humanity. And it comes at the cost of our humanity when we go through that. And I was curious, like, so like I've broken apart some of this stuff with a therapist, thinking like an Asian American female therapist, who is also Chinese. So like she knows my language, so like I could speak in Cantonese with her when my dad would say ridiculous things, or when I was just trying to unpack like the differences in culture that I didn't understand. I'm wondering like if either of you have gone to therapy or have thought about therapy.
I actually just sought out one, so I have to fill out paperwork, but I think it was time. I thought I could battle it all on my own. I was very much, going back to I don't need help. But I think after meeting a couple of guys that I always mention him, Sabo Shen and Gavin Masamiya. Gavin is a psychologist and he has these sessions called Flow Masters. And basically he just plays lo-fi music, and he's like, all right, it was basically like art therapy and group therapy masked to be cool. So he plays music, he asks topics, and then I kind of just flowed. And there, at one point I was talking about my suicide story, and they weren't victimized tears. They were just like, oh shit, like I kind of felt lighter, like being able to talk about it. So with that being said, I my fiance was like, maybe it's time you actually sought professional help. And like you said, it is a female Chinese American, so it's gonna help me a lot. And I always preach to that it's okay for us, especially Asian men, to reach out for help, and to seek professional help, and that it's okay to talk about your emotions, and mental health. Just trying to break that stigma. And I would be a hypocrite if I didn't myself. So I thought it was about time that I reach out for one.
Definitely, definitely. So I personally haven't like reached out for professional help just yet, but I do like have, in a sense, like a support network where it's like, so for me, I still have this kind of, in a sense, like this really big Asian man thing, right? It's like I just, whatever my emotions are, I just hold and I bottle, and then it explodes. Like I know that happens, and I know it's not healthy.
Yeah.
And I have friends, and as well as kind of like family members that I personally like reach out to when I like am in these kind of like distresses, like where it's like, I'm just struggling and I just need to like talk. So I haven't like, seek professional help to really like, find the root causes of all this stuff. But I do have like a support network that I do kind of communicate with and just kind of like dabble in my thoughts, and they just chill and listen. And I appreciate that a lot from them. It's like free therapy.
Hey, friends are the ones who help, and support networks like are the ones who get us out this like isolation and feeling alone. Like, like with everything we were talking about teaching, about how like, all these politicians and leadership are saying to me, like, you need to go back. You are an essential worker, you teachers. And like, you don't deserve to like think about your life, like, I feel like we've all been gaslit as teachers through this whole thing. And it's been other teachers who are like, actually, it's not crazy to want to protect our communities and our lives right now, especially when there's an alternative, which is called remote learning, which is what we did for the past 3 months. So like, just constantly reading other teachers' thoughts has been really helpful for me not to go and spiral into like a big old depression about like that teachers don't matter, and like our education system doesn't matter, and students don't matter. But yeah, we always need that support system, and that's why I keep trying to speak up and sharing stories like that, about my parents. Like, I just shared on the Moth Radio Hour again about how my dad's love language is acts of service and quality time, right? That he wants to feed me. My mom wants to feed me. That's why my mom comes to Chinatown once a month and brings me food, because she wants to be a mom. And I have to realize that once I know those love languages, then I can see my parents a little bit differently too. And as a teacher, if I can share, like in the New Republic, like there are all these concerns like adequate ventilation that hasn't been addressed because our schools have been defunded for decades. Like, me just writing that down, I've gotten so many comments from fellow teachers saying, thank you, Annie, for just saying it out loud so I don't feel crazy, and that's why it's so important for us to keep telling these stories. And that's why I keep telling my cousin Vincent Chin's story all the time, because I have always known that, like, if the US was going to attack China or North Korea, like anyone who looked like us would become the enemy real quick, because we all of a sudden become the enemy, like during these coronavirus times. So it's really important for us to like share everything. And I thank you both for sharing your experiences as Asian American men who want to seek out therapy either now or in the future, because it's important that we normalize that.
For sure. And you mentioned that schools were poorly funded, and since you worked in the CPS system as well, I kind of wanted to try to see if we could compare the two. So I know, we definitely have problems of shortages of, substitute teachers, social workers, nurses. We got year-long teacher vacancies, and with poor funding comes, poor curriculums and poor infrastructure. So um, what would be the best way to prepare for those types of schools during this pandemic?
Repeat that question.
So what are like, how can we, what's the best protocol to feel prepared, and what's like sufficient enough to reopen schools?
I mean, with our crumbling infrastructure now in the schools, like it just doesn't seem safe to reopen. Like I taught the whole last year in a windowless classroom. The year before that, I taught in what was actually a closet.
Damn.
Like what was
Wait,
built
what?
as a closet. Yeah. So like it was a big closet. And so like I teach special education. So I teach a smaller class, 12 students. So my class, like, you can get into a smaller space. So
But in a
because,
closet?
yeah. So like, it was like it's a big closet. So like it fit us obviously, but like when it was built as a closet or as like an office for an administrator. It was not built as a classroom. And so, I taught in there, like, and the year before, and just to say that, like, because New York City has overcrowded schools, like, I don't know the numbers offhand, but we've been cramming 34, 36 kids into classrooms when, like, the limit might be, like, 32, depending on the age you're in. We're in a crisis now where we have to socially distance in a classroom, and we might have to split up the class into like 4 little groups in order to teach them all, which means our kids gonna really come into school one day a week. If cohort A is coming in Monday, then cohort B is coming in Tuesday, cohort C is coming in Wednesday. Like, does it make sense to open schools when kids are only going to come in 1 or 2 days a week? Also, like, when you're having different kids come into my classroom every single day, can you actually contact trace and see like which kid got sick and which kid got me, hopefully never sick, but like possibly me getting sick? And then I teach cohort B the next day. Like, does that make sense during a pandemic to possibly spread it that way, right? That's just one of a million questions that we have. Meanwhile, because I have a windowless classroom, like, we probably won't likely have the filter needed to make my classroom adequately ventilated. So I'm going to have to teach in the library next year with another class whose class is also getting kicked out of their classroom because they don't have adequate ventilation needs. Our school is right by a highway. So if we open the windows, we're going to smell the cars and the fumes. And this is just one school out of 1,800 schools where we don't even have air conditioning in most buildings already. Like in early March, we didn't have soap. We had broken sinks in the boys' bathrooms always. We didn't have funding for basic things like that. I have to steal office supplies from home and bring them to work, right? Whereas that's just not the case for any other job I know of. So to expect all of those decades of crumbling infrastructure and defunding of our schools to all of a sudden be fixed in time for school to reopen in a month, that is not happening. It is not happening. So it's crazy for them to even think about reopening, but they're pushing through because New York City has the lowest rates in the country right now, even though I teach in Sunset Park, and the rates of coronavirus test positivity rates right now are 3.69%, which is higher than Mayor de Blasio's like cutoff of 3%. So it's actually rapidly transmitting in the community in which I teach right now. So does it actually mean that it's safe to reopen in my school's neighborhood? No. It also just goes to show the inequity of this virus, where Black and Brown communities have been hit hardest, where over 100 school-based staff have died in New York City from the coronavirus. And most of those people were Black and brown staff members.
And I think you shared an article recently, right? Like when schools reopened, there was 70,000 new cases. Was that right?
Oh, I don't know exactly the number.
Yeah, there
It
was
feels like a million years ago, because it was like, I feel like these past 5 months are just like 3-4 years of
yeah.
time.
And just quick background about me. So I'm currently studying public health epidemiology, and so
Oh,
while
wow. We need you.
and while COVID doesn't really like hurt the kids as much as the data shows, that is considered an acute infection, and so it's a rare disease. But MISC, so multi-system inflammatory syndrome, and Kawasaki disease are very rare among children. But once they get it, they have abdominal pain, gut pain, vomiting, diarrhea, rashes, fevers, like all that. So the virus itself will not hurt them, but it can cause these diseases. So like you said, right, it's not safe to have these children in close proximity while that SARS-CoV-2, right, that's what's passing around. Students are literally like nuclear reactors. They carry this disease everywhere, and imagine when you bring it home, right? It's just not, there's no way. And like you said, everyone's crammed. And like my sister, who's in school in Chicago, they are given the option to either come in twice a day or twice a week, and the rest of the 3 days online, or you could just do all online. And I'm like, okay, well, who's going to come in anyway? So everyone's going to do a remote.
Well,
But
I'm going to clarify that Chicago went remote because Tuesday afternoon this week, Chicago teachers threatened a strike vote. And then Tuesday night, they were like, we're going fully remote. So it came from a strike threat.
That's what happens when you voice. And if you don't voice,
like New York, my union, the same day that Chicago teachers threatened to strike, my union put out a petition. And the petition didn't even say close schools. The petition says we can only reopen when it's safe. So it mandated like a list of things like PPE, all those things, adequate ventilation. But it stopped it did not say to shut down school buildings, which is ridiculous. Everything we're talking about right now says like we're not ready. We just aren't ready.
And if we can't even supply our healthcare workers, how the hell are we going to supply teachers, right? If there's already a shortage there, unless they're holding some behind or reallocating resources. But
right before Chicago went fully remote, they said like they had however many things of wipes for educators, and it was like 2 things of wipes per teacher or something, or 2 things of wipes per student or something, which is definitely not adequate because everyone is trying to get these supplies right now across the nation. And to think we'd be doing that for 1.1 million students in our school system, which is an eighth of New York City, like having every kid come in, like that is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. And I'm like torn because while I understand that, children around that elementary age, growth and development is so key, right? And so they need schooling and they need that physical bond with like their peers and their teachers. But at the same time, the health risks of the virus, I don't know, it's really hard to pick, but I think, most of us are leaning more towards the greater good, which is remote learning.
Right.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's a lot of government leadership that, is changing CDC guidelines, for instance, and pushing schools to reopen, including Trump. He's threatened to withhold funding from schools if we don't reopen in person, even though 13 of the 15 largest school districts in America have said they're going fully remote in the fall. So it's just, there are so many fault lines right now, and no one's really taking accountability for if and when cases go full throttle. I'll also say that in summer school, I read an article in The Progressive today saying that, there was a summer school for special needs students who people have argued need the most care. As a special education teacher, I know that, like, I've had kids, who I've helped with diapers, helped I've literally helped with potty training for some of them, helped them learn how to speak, use devices to speak. So there are a lot of kids who do need care. And, some people are like, oh, yeah, you need to be there, Annie, in order to take care of those kids. I'm like, but I also don't feel safe. And I don't know if those families feel safe either, even though they really need that care. Um, some people have opted, like in a Texas district, like teachers have to volunteer to work in person, and parents too. So like that's an okay workaround, even though that still doesn't stop the spread of coronavirus. But to force teachers who are very scared and anxious to go to school, like I think that's not okay either right now, especially during a pandemic when so many things are unsure.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also saying in these articles, like it's not like individual, like even protests, like the studies have shown like protests aren't spreading the coronavirus. It's like these super spreader events, where like one person's in a group of like 10 people at a time, and then they go out into their communities, and then spread it again. These super spreader events are the ones causing these outbreaks. And if we open schools, it will be a super spreader event at some point. Going back to that summer school thing, I didn't finish that thought. There were these special education summer schools where they didn't do the adequate contact tracing here in New York State. And it spread the coronavirus in that county. So I just don't think we have the infrastructure in place for contact tracing, to have enough equipment, supplies, and infrastructure to get this done. I just don't. Like, we need millions and billions of dollars to get this together. And without federal funding, we still haven't passed the HEROES Act. Without that money, it's not possible. It just isn't possible.
Yeah, we don't even have funds for meeting the minimum amount of contact tracing. Like in Illinois, we're supposed to have like thousands of contact tracers, but I read somewhere, it could have changed by now, but there was only maybe a couple hundred.
Right.
There's
Right.
no funding. And how are we supposed to combat,
And there's a hiring freeze of teachers. So like, how can
Oh,
we
is there?
get teachers? Yes, there's a hiring freeze here in New York City of teachers. Whereas I know a handful of teachers who have already resigned or retired because they don't want to deal with this. And so how are we going to teach with more staff like needed, because we need them for in-person and remote, and also like do everything we need? It's not happening. It's just not happening.
And I just wanted to just go back just a little bit. We really respect that you're speaking up and you're being an activist and you're just really out there, standing up for everyone. And would you say that the case of Vincent Chin inspired you to speak up and really like live up to that legacy you mentioned in the past interviews?
I am definitely inspired by my cousin Vincent Chin and my great auntie Lily Chin's examples. Lily Chin is the mother of Vincent Chin, and Lily Chin is my grandmother's sister. So just to be clear on how I am related to Vincent Chin, he is my uncle / cousin. And I found out that I was related to him not through my family directly, but through watching a PBS documentary when I was 13 called Becoming American, The Chinese Experience, which we've been talking a lot about, like trying to belong here in America, especially as Chinese people. And so I was watching this, and it was like the last 20 minutes, and like it was like the 80s, and I was watching these people who looked like me protest in English. And all my elders here in Chinatown, all the adults I knew besides my second grade teacher, Miss Yi, all of them spoke Chinese and only knew Chinese. So like, to think of us as having been in America for a long time was already a startling thought of, wow, like we actually belong here. But then to see these marchers, and then to see this woman, Lily Chin, say to everyone, I want justice for my son, like it just felt very powerful. And she like looked like my grandma. And I found out through my mom that she is my grandma's sister. So I was like, wow, like this woman who spoke up for Vincent Chin, who was killed for looking Japanese during this auto workers crisis in the 80s, it was Lily Chin's advocacy that made Vincent Chin's name known to everyone. We would not know Vincent Chin's name today without my great auntie Lily Chin's example. You know, Helen Zia, who fought for my cousin Vincent Chin, she told me that as much. Like, Helen Zia like helped gather all the Michigan lawyers, any Asian American lawyer who was like to real estate or whatever it is, and she brought them together. And no one wanted to take up this case because they weren't civil rights lawyers. And Lily Chin stood up and she was like, I will speak up for my son. And that galvanized everyone in the room to fight. And it caused the Pan-Asian American movement, where many of my friends today identify as Asian American because Lily Chin brought Chinese people, Japanese people, Korean Americans, all these people who look like us together. And we all declared ourselves Asian Americans because we were fighting for my cousin. And so every time I get really hopeless or cynical, like this week, I cried because, you know, I just felt like we're going to be spending our whole summer fighting for our lives around the school reopening. And I'm not the only teacher feeling that way. I just felt so hopeless. And then I just remembered, right, like it takes all of us speaking up. It takes someone like my great auntie Lily Chin just saying, I'm doing this, come with me to like get this done, you know. And while my family didn't get justice for Vincent's murder, we did cause a hell of a lot more Asian American students to become lawyers. And we got all these organizations together that fight for Asian American rights today that led the precedent for the organizations that are fighting against anti-Asian hate crimes around coronavirus. And my great auntie Lily Chin was an instrumental part of that. So I just have to remember, right, like this is my legacy, that I have to keep telling this story because it really did take a few people to make a mass movement happen.
Definitely. That's like, just to think back on, you know, how, you know, your grandmother's sister, right, Lily Chin, just kind of like said, this is not justice, and just took up the mantle in a sense and fought for what was right. And she, and from that little scenario, that little bubble, right, it exploded, right, into a national event, like a national uprise, right, in terms of like just gathering all of us people of color. But like, it wasn't not just Asian Americans. Like, if I remember correctly, Jesse Jackson was actually a part of this too, in a sense, where he was like, he showed up to a lot of these call it protests, just to show support and kind of like show that we're all in this together. All of us that are people of color, you know, we are all trying to fight for the same thing, which is just rights, as well as kind of equal opportunity, and just kind of like promoting equality across the board. You know, it's just really crazy and really interesting to see that, you know, now with like the whole like Black Lives Matter movement, like, you know, resurging, to see the same commonalities, right, where we're all supporting each other and trying to, you know, fight for, you know, what's right, as well as kind of like trying to create a better bond that, you know, has been, in a sense, like a feeling of non-existent for a lot of Asian Americans, especially during the beginning of the whole COVID situation.
Right.
You know?
Right. Like for us, like I think Asian Americans have always felt in some case invisible. Like I just finished reading Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings, which I suggest to everyone, of just this feeling like the racism against us is not important enough to be talked about. But we also, with the model minority myth, like you were talking about, Vincent, earlier, like that we do have privileges, especially as East Asian people in particular, in the society. And, you know, we're the white supremacist project right now is to make us be like the next white people almost. And there are so many Asian Americans who want proximity to whiteness because it gives privileges. And we have to reject that. We have to reject it fully. And we also have to talk about why so many Asian Americans can't say Black Lives Matter, and why we have to say Black Lives Matter as a community. Why aren't we there in the rallies all the time? Like, and this is also not to center us. Like, we should not be centering ourselves in this movement work. But going back to what I said about my great auntie Lily Chin, it's also Erica Garner's daughter, who also passed away, by the way. And it's Michael Brown's mother. It's Akai Gurley's auntie holding up the mantle for this Black Lives Matter movement to continue, right? And it shouldn't just be on the family members and the descendants to keep saying Black Lives Matter and to keep telling these people's stories. But that's why I keep telling Vincent's story, because it does matter that I am a descendant, because people see that it matters to me, and then it hits them. It's like a humanizing thing. Like, you can hear a story happening. You can hear that Michael Brown was murdered. You can hear Akai Gurley was killed. You can hear all these people are killed. And it's so sad that their humanity is stripped away from them, like of them being fathers, of them being sons, of them working whatever jobs they did, because we only focus on George Floyd's murder and not George Floyd's life.
Yeah, and I just want to say, when we heard about your story, learning about Vincent Chin and going out to Detroit, you like look for his gravestone as well, right?
Yes.
It really moved us, because it's one of those where you really like you know it's part of your legacy, it's part of your family history, and it's like, why are you, like, to the parents and family, like, why are you not telling me, like, this matters to me? And it gave us a visual that inside you, as soon as you learned that was your bugle call, it was like an instant match, a fire sparked, and you're like, oh shit, I have a responsibility now, I have a legacy to live up to. And
But
with that being,
it also wasn't like that at 13. Like, it was like my mom was like, oh, like, I'm not telling you anything more. Like, she refused to tell me anything more because it was so traumatic for my family. Like, we fought for years to try to get justice, and we didn't. And it was an open and shut case in our eyes. Like, these two guys admitted they murdered our cousin, and there were 70 to 100 witnesses. Like, it should have been open and shut like that, but it wasn't. So we lost faith in the American justice system. That's why Lily Chin had to go back to China, because she couldn't deal with the journalists anymore who were hounding her for a soundbite, because they were so focused on her trauma and not her life, that she had to go back and have a life outside of this stupid American justice system. And it took me like 10 years to figure out that story. You know, it took me 10 years to reconcile, like, this is mine, that I do have to do something, because I was so busy also, like, trying not to cause my family more trauma, you know. And like, I have to consider that as I'm doing this. I've had family members tell me not to talk about Vincent anymore because it hurts them, you know, because they knew Vincent, you know, like, before he died. And every time we talk, like, I didn't know him. I came to America after he was killed. And, you know, it is not as simple as, like, you know, this activated me. I don't think it's as simple for anyone like that. I think, you know, I was listening to the Code Switch podcast, Why Now White People, around why they are supporting the Black Lives Matter movement now. And some of them were like, it was too shameful to finally, like, to not have done something for the past 6 years of the Black Lives Matter movement existing. And it's not just like a spark that comes, not for everyone. It takes a lot of and I'm an organizer. Like, you know, I was the co-chair of the special ed committee in the Chicago Teachers Union a few years ago. And like, we had to organize parents and students and educators and community advocates to think we can actually win the fight and get back staff members and get back funding for special education. And we had to continue to tell the stories of what was happening in our classrooms to humanize what money looked like and what the money would actually do for our classrooms. And for tenants' rights organizations like CAV here in New York City, we have to humanize, like, what the living conditions are like for these people, and, you know, what they're fighting for. and make it known like this X amount of money will go toward making this living environment much better for people in Chinatown, right? And it takes all of us humanizing our stories, just like you are on this podcast, to say, like, that's why I'm a storyteller, like, to make sure people don't feel alone, but it also, like, eventually helps galvanize people to action, because people don't feel so powerless anymore. We are so made to feel so powerless in our societies. And it's okay to mourn that too. Like, you know, I told you earlier that I was crying. Like, I've cried a lot this summer because I feel so powerless in, like, helping save students' lives and educators' lives through this reckless reopening schools plan. And we're made to feel powerless. We're made to feel like the lobbyists and the big businesses have all the power, when actually Chicago, they're ending a strike, closed their school building. We have to remember that, like, it takes us doing this. Like, it takes us feeling like we have power to actually make the change. And that's why it took me 10 years, like, to overcome a lot of that powerlessness I have around growing up in Chinatown and feeling like we're new Americans. Like, why should I rock the boat? Why should Lily Chin rock the boat? And then I remember, right, Lily Chin rocked the boat anyway. And it was like, right, like, I need to do the same. But it took a long time for me to finally come out and say I am related to this man.
Right.
And the first time I actually did it was around the Akai Gurley case, where a Chinese American man who went to elementary school in the same elementary school I did, he killed Akai Gurley in a stairwell, Peter Liang. And when I saw 10,000 Asian Americans who were mostly Chinese American go and support this police officer, I just knew there was something wrong with that. That, you know, even though Peter Liang never meant to kill Akai Gurley in that stairwell, he was there anyway. He shouldn't have shot his gun. He shouldn't have done that. And why are 10,000 people going and supporting the Chinese American cop who killed Akai Gurley and putting up middle fingers to Akai Gurley's auntie? Like, that was not okay. That was the first time I went public with me being related to Vincent Chin, because I just felt like it was time, and that people were using Vincent Chin's injustice to justify Peter Liang's, you know, justice, or whatever that meant. And it wasn't okay anymore.
Yeah. Wow, you definitely just changed my visual. Now, what was a spark? You know, like you said, it takes time to grow into a wildfire, and it's a ripple effect, right? It affects everyone around you. And I guess finally, what is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
I mean, it's funny. On my OkCupid profile back in the day when I had OkCupid, my first line is like, I am Annie, and, like, you know, what does it say? And the first line I wrote was, I am going to change the world. I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I know it's through helping people feel powerful. I know that's what I do as a teacher, and what I do as an activist and a storyteller, right? That, like, you know, I just went on a off stage, and, like, I told the story about my cousin, and then all of a sudden I'm on the radio being heard by millions of people, which is awesome. But, like, I think that's just gonna change as I learn more. I've been changed by my students. I've been changed by my community here in Chinatown. Humbled to always learn that, like, you know, we don't actually come from a deficit model. Like, none of us are broken. Like, I think we said that earlier, that, like, we feel we're broken, but I think we live multitudes, and we just haven't been taught to share those multitudes in ways that make us feel powerful. And if we're actually forgiving of ourselves and change that dynamic of how we treated ourselves, like, we might actually go change the world. If we felt like each of us had a role in how climate change were to be averted, then we might actually do it. But I think so many of us feel so powerless with so many different things. That's why when I watched the George Floyd video, you know, I felt powerless. I was like, here's yet another video of a Black man and a Black person being killed. What's going to be different this time? And that was my privilege as an Asian American being like, I can go to bed tonight because I know I can walk outside the street and a police officer won't choke me like that. And then I was wrong. And there were these mass protests that will change the world, hopefully. But we have to keep putting pressure because nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. Like, no meaningful change has happened. You know, in New York City, they're like, oh, defund the police, defund NYPD. We'll do it. But in fact, they just moved the money from our, like, the NYPD officers that are in our school buildings, and they just put it in the Department of Ed budget. But that doesn't change the fact that there are cops still in our schools. That's not actually defunding the police. So we really have to go far and above to learn what abolition means, to learn how communities keep us safe. There's so much learning that still needs to be done by all of us, but nothing has changed since George Floyd was murdered. Nothing. And we cannot accept that. And we cannot let the fact that the police will not murder us as a reason to do nothing.
For sure. Thank you for that. And I guess to close off, how can our listeners and people who know you are listen to you, how could we be better allies for teachers and for this movement?
First off, I'm not the best ally either. I am still learning. I've had many people call me out over things like, you know, centering being Asian American in this, you know, Asians for Black Lives Matter movement, for instance. Like, that has been a critique that I take. I'm like, I cannot center myself in this, but I do have to talk to fellow Asian Americans about this because we're the ones that need to change. But if we're talking, like, Black Lives Matter should not matter to me just because there's some Asian American issue. It should always matter to me. In terms of being a better ally to teachers and students, you know, I've been working with a lot of other teachers to have families choose remote only situations. Like, I've, you know, written and spoken about how our infrastructure is crumbling. So to just share that it's not just us, you know, social distancing and having enough supplies that will keep us safe. Like, we actually have way more like ventilation issues, logistical issues that will not be solved in a month. And to share that information out with parents and students and other educators who really don't know enough information right now. None of us have enough information to really reopen schools in a safe manner. And it's really about protecting all of us. Like, you know, I was asked in that New Republic interview, like, what would you say to a nurse who says it's your duty as teachers to go back? And I told her that our duty is to each other. Our duty is to protect each other. And we have to protect each other right now by not spreading this virus. Like, it is as simple as that. And to all the anti-maskers out there, like, you are spreading the virus, possibly. You are telling people it's okay to spread the virus and kill people. That is what you're saying with your message around anti-masking. I was at a protest on Monday, actually, around stopping school reopenings, and there were a number of men who did not wear masks, who were filming people. One guy had an unmasked, unmuzzled shirt, and all of these men happened to be white men. And they were harassing women like me during the protests, and asking us like, oh, like, do you like this footage I just filmed of this other protester? Because they feel like their freedom and their choice is more important than our collective lives. Like, I was very hopeful in the beginning of this pandemic that we might learn to be collective together, that we might learn collectivism. That's how all these Asian countries have been able to keep down the virus. But we really haven't learned our lesson as Americans. And we really need to spread the message that this is about us and it's not about you.
Definitely. I agree with that 100%. Like, that's definitely something that's a real big issue, right, across America. Like, we're so focused on just individual, like yourself, and only you as being like the center of attention, that we brush over the fact that the collective, right, is what really makes or breaks the society, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
to want that, you know, I guess, spotlight on you to be like, oh, this is not right. This is, you know, putting a mask on is like, this is communism, or this is like totally fascist way of like, you know, kind of trying to control us and everything like that. I'm like, it is not that at all. It's just trying to protect the collective community to better reduce the number of cases, you know. And it's
Right.
just a really crazy thought that people will compare the wearing of masks to like fascist communism, and like, it's like, this is nothing like that.
No.
You still have your freedom to do whatever you please. You still have the freedom to travel. You still have the freedom to, you know, work the job you love to work. You know, you're not forced into situations where you have to, like, you know, serve the country in a way where it's like a fascist. You know, it's like completely different.
Right. And it's funny, it's this anti-intellectualism and anti-science movement that has allowed this to happen. And you know, I do know Trump voters. I do know people who voted for Trump, and you know, they're like, I've heard from a few of them, they're starting to question like whether they caused this, and I'm like, you know what, it's a movement in this country toward us feeling like we don't matter, that we're powerless, that led to Trump in the first place. And that was the exact wrong way to go about feeling powerful, right? That people were like, oh, this guy's a businessman. This guy doesn't take a crap from anyone. That's why he's going to be a good president. And that actually has put us in this situation where we went above 5 million cases just yesterday,
the other day.
in this country. Yep. It's mind-boggling. And I'm hoping this will be, you know, we might have to go through some more trials as a country, and I don't want that. But I'm hoping like we learn from this, that like we have to take care of each other. The reason why schools can't reopen is because there wasn't a social safety net in the first place to protect our people. And if there were, we might have gone through this a lot better if people were paid to not work and to stay home right now. If people had rent, you know, covered, if people had childcare covered, if people had parental and maternity leave covered, and all of these other countries have been able to do that. Like, if we had those things in place already, if we had healthcare for all, then we might not be in the situation we're in right now. So I'm hoping that this will lead to a lot of change in the future, including around climate change, that will help us as a society heal from all this, because we still haven't mourned the dead, and we still
Definitely
refuse to mourn the dead in order for the economy to move forward, and that's just wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with that.
And to finish off, I know we went a little over time, but thank you so much, Annie, for sticking through. What is one last bit of advice you would like to leave our listeners, specifically for the Asian American community?
Ooh, one last piece of advice. Like, I am an advice giver. It's funny because like I've been on other podcasts and other interviews where I've been asked this question. I'm like, who am I to speak? And then that just goes back to like the powerlessness that we felt like as kids over our situations, right? And it's just to really get over that imposter syndrome, that you matter, your voice matters. Just going back to my great auntie Lily Chin, her voice sparked a movement. Like, it's her that allowed us to know Vincent Chin's name and allowed all these Asian American organizations and groups to exist today. And sometimes it takes one, sometimes it takes like a small group of people, like Margaret Mead said. But we all have to speak up, and we all have to do something. And we all have to get out of this bubble that is our powerlessness and really feel like where can we feel powerful and where can we act. And you have to also be true to yourself in that you can't just go and like co-opt a movement. Like there's like a term called astroturfing, where they're like, oh, like we'll open these charter schools that are actually funded by billionaires and that'll change our school system, whereas that actually takes away funding from our public schools. That's not okay. But to actually listen to people on the ground and hear what they're doing and act in service of the community in that way, and speak toward the community. I think everything that I have done has been in service of the community. I hope. If I have a big ego, I need people to call me out on it. But that everything I'm trying to do is in service of my community.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And where can people find you on social media? I know I mentioned earlier, but just one more time.
Yes. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Annie Tangent. And you can find my work at annietan.com.
Awesome. And for our viewers and listeners, you can find us at TheEatingCast on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff, all those platforms. And yeah, that's Annie Tan, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, Annie, I just want to thank you for taking part of your day to come on and just kind of like, share your story. It's definitely an honor to really kind of like get your insight on everything, and just kind of see how we can, as a community, right, can kind of move forward and kind of like show support for the collective in a sense.
Right. And it takes us like not being invisible. Like it takes us feeling like we're powerful in order to make things change. I think it's the invisibility and powerlessness that we all feel that leads to resentment and leads us to do things that actually don't serve our collective community. And I think we've all learned that with the coronavirus. So we gotta feel powerful in each and every individual person in stopping this from spreading and in everything else we do moving forward.
Definitely. And with that said, to our viewers and our listeners, we just want to thank you guys for stopping by, and we will catch you guys in the next one. So take care and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.